Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Most's Earth Day event. Thanks so much for being here. So, as you know, today I will be reading my book, A Look Into Tomorrow. And some of you might also know that I work at National Grid. So, before I go ahead and start reading, I will talk a little bit about my experience there. But I just wanted to say that National Grid has been a sponsor of Most for many of years, and we're very happy to be here right now on Earth Day with you all. All right, so I'll go ahead and get started. So I currently am working at National Grid, but I'm also an author, and I published A Look Into Tomorrow about 2 years ago in 2019. And really, it was something that took me about 8 years to write. So I started a long time ago, and it was for a volunteer project. And then over time, I continued to modify the book and just continue to make it better, change the drawings, and make it what it is today. So actually, when I first started 8 years ago, I made a draft that looks like this. So I don't know if you can see it here, but it's sort of, it's just colored pencil, and the drawings definitely don't look like they look like today. But then if you look at the book now, it's much, much different. So you can see that a lot has changed in the past 8 years. And so what led me to making this book was a passion for the environment. So this kind of relates to Earth Day because I think on Earth Day a lot about why we care about the environment and the reasons why we do things to help other people care about the environment too. So I was very inspired by the environment, and I decided that I would try to help other people understand that same passion for the environment that I had. So hopefully by reading this book, that's also something that you get from it. Right now at National Grid, I work in something called renewable energy. So some of you might have heard of that. And my job is that I help people just like you be able to get access to those types of clean energy. So, energy from nature, like wind, solar, and water energy. So, some of you might be familiar with those types of things, and that's also talked about in the book. So, we can go ahead and talk in the book a little bit more about that. And then at the end, if you have questions, please let me know. So, this is my first time using Vimeo, but I think all of you guys probably know how to use it. And what I'll do is I will start reading. I'll share my screen, and if you already have a book, you can bring your book with you and follow along. If you don't have a book, that's okay. And I will just go ahead and share the book on my screen. And then if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. So at the end of the book reading, I'll be doing a question and answer session. So even though I can't hear you, I can still listen to your questions. All right, so I'll go ahead and get the book up. All right, so you can probably see my entire screen right now. And hopefully you can see this. If not, please let me know. All right. All was dark in the city of Reston. The traffic had calmed down, the birds had stopped chirping, and the crickets began to whisper their nighttime song. It was 9 o'clock, and Karen was ready to go to bed. She brushed her teeth, leaving the faucet on while she scrubbed. Then she walked over to her room, leaving the bedroom lights on as she huddled under the covers. That night, Karen's mother came into the room and told her a story about the polar bears in the North Pole. Karen began to think about how the polar bears are losing their icy homes because of climate change. The ice that the polar bears live on is melting, which makes it hard for them to find food. Is that because of pollution? Karen thought. That night, the windows rattled, the walls shook, and the door to Karen's room swung open. Whoosh! She was in a place more beautiful than she could ever imagine. This new world seemed to have so much life. There were trees and plants everywhere, on porches, in houses, and even on buildings. Karen took a deep breath. The air was so fresh and clean. This place is amazing, she thought. Hey, are you coming on the tour? A voice from behind called. Karen turned around to see a boy in a park ranger shirt surrounded by a group of people. Maybe I can learn more about where I am if I join. She answered, Yes, I am. For those of you who are new, this is the renewable energy world, Thomas exclaimed. I love it here. The first stop on the tour is a place where animals and vegetation live in harmony. He pointed behind him to a lush meadow. Here we're enjoying the vibrant green grass, squirrels scurried along the brown trunks of trees, and birds flew across the clear blue sky. This is amazing, Karen whispered, making sure not to disturb the animals. We never have this many animals where I live. Really? Thomas asked. We make sure to leave extra land for the animals so they can have a home too. What a great idea, said Karen. As Karen looked up from the grassy meadow, she saw a row of large pinwheels emerging from a hill. Are those wind turbines? She asked. Yes, said Thomas. They give us electricity to power things like light bulbs. Oh, those round things that go in lamps? Asked Karen. Kind of, but a little different, Thomas replied. We used those light bulbs many years ago. Then we realized that LED light bulbs could save so much more energy. Now we use them instead. Wow, how cool, Karen declared. I'll ask my family to start using those. Our next stop is the city. One of my favorite places in this renewable energy world, explained Thomas. From the field, the tour group walked along a nicely paved sidewalk where many people were enjoying the pleasant weather. Why are there so many people walking on the sidewalk? Asked Karen. Don't you have cars? Here, replied Thomas, almost everyone walks. If we want to go somewhere close by, we walk or bike. Doing this helps keep the air clean and fresh. If we want to go somewhere far away, we use zoo mods, Thomas explained. Zoo mods are subways that are fueled by electricity from renewable sources like wind, water, and light. Thomas waved the group over to the zoo mods. They all stepped in as soon as the next zoo mod arrived. There were many small seats to fit lots of passengers, and the inside was beautiful, clean, and new. Karen looked out of the window. As she glanced outward, she could see almost every area of this renewable energy world. As she gazed in awe at the townspeople enjoying their time outdoors, Karen noticed a number of green and blue boxes filled with glass bottles and paper, even soda cans. It was clear to her that the people in this city recycle often because of the connection they felt to the planet and its resources. Karen looked out at the buildings around her. There were shopping centers, apartments, and more, all of which had flashy metal squares on top. Karen had learned about these in science class. They were solar panels which collect energy from the sun. This reminds me, I should tell my teacher to look into putting those on the school's roof. As Karen continued to watch the scene outside the window, she couldn't help but think about how much nicer everything here was. The air was fresh because people did not burn fuel that polluted the sky, but instead used energy from nature. There was color and life to the city, added by fruits and vegetables growing on bushes and trees, colorful recycling bins, and content animals grazing. There were people outside. There were people enjoying their commutes with space to walk outside and travel indoors. She felt a strong connection to the town. This is paradise. A can rolled towards Karen's foot. Luckily, there was a recycling bin in the zoo mod. Karen's newfound consideration landed her back in Reston. She remembered how fantastic the renewable energy world was, sprang up from her bed, and ran down to the kitchen where she could smell her dad making waffles. Dad, she shouted, let's help out the environment. Let's recycle, use those funny looking LED lights, and start our own garden. Why have you decided to suddenly care so much about the planet? Karen's dad asked. Karen smiled. Because, she announced, I just visited the future, and the future is great. All right. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Okay. All right. So hopefully you guys all were able to listen to that story and that you have a few questions. If you hadn't really read the book beforehand, hopefully this was a really good introduction and you were able to see it for the first time and hopefully go through it as though you were the main character. So I'm now going to go ahead and look at the chat to see if anyone has any questions. So we have some comments here. Thank you so much. Great work and continuing the process. Thank you. That's great. I appreciate all the nice comments. All right, so first one here we have from James is how can we save more animals? So that's a really good question, and that's actually a part of the book where we talk about being in the city and there's a space for animals. So there were squirrels and birds and deer kind of grazing on the grass. And so one thing that really showed in the book was that they had a lot of land that they were on, right? So I think one of the biggest ways that we can help animals out is to give them a habitat to live in. And so I know that can be really tough, especially if you live somewhere that is rural, so not in a city, for example. But a way that you could also make a rural area more animal friendly is if you put certain plants in your garden that might attract certain animals. So for example, I know that there's certain plants that attract bees. And so, you know, bees are one of the animals or insects that has been declining in population. And so a lot of people are trying to plant in their garden to attract more bees. Also, there are certain plants that you can put in your garden that do not harm certain animals. And unfortunately, I don't know them off the top of my head, but I'm sure that if you looked and you tried to find your own plants that you could put in your garden, that would be helpful too. But definitely giving them a space to live is a really, really good one. All right, thanks, James, for that. So now we'll go ahead and I see Elizabeth. How can we teach our children best about recycling? Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So, yeah, I mean, recycling is a difficult concept. I know that one of the things that we actually recently did for Earth Week at National Grid was we had a recycling session with kids and taught them about kind of making something new out of recycling products that they had around their house. So, for example, like having a glass cup or something like this, right? And so instead of just kind of putting it in the recycling bin, you could put tape around it, or you could paint it and make it into a plant holder or something new that you could use. And I know that that's more along the side of reusing rather than recycling, but I think that's a really good way for them to understand that you can actually use something more than just once. Recycling in general, I know that there's some really, really good websites out there that can tell you about it. But one that I find helpful is just even teaching your kids about what can be recycled. So, you know, what kind of paper can be recycled? Can you recycle a dirty pizza box? And just teaching them about that can be really, really helpful. Great. Okay, and then Earth Day, that's a really cool name. I wish my name was Earth Day. Asks, what does a wind turbine do? So a wind turbine is really cool, and I wish I had one for you in the back here because I used to have one that I built, but it broke. So wind turbine is something that takes the wind that you get from being outside and turns it into electricity. So hopefully you know what electricity is. It's where it's what you have that fuels light bulbs. It fuels air conditioning. It fuels a lot of the things that you do in your life. And so a wind turbine is just taking that natural energy from the outside and putting it into something that you can use. So that's what a wind turbine does. Great. And Ms. Phillips says, great book. I want to pick up a copy. Awesome. Thank you. Is there anything else National Grid offers for kids? I think that's a really good question. I know that National Grid does do a lot of activities with kids and partners with many different communities. But off the top of my head, I don't particularly know. But I know that if you go online and you look at National Grid's website, you'll probably be able to find some answers there. All right, thanks for asking that. All right, so Jadia says, how can I recycle at home or school? That's a really good question. So I'm not sure, Jadia, if you're actually in school yet, but I know that if you are, most schools do have a recycling bin. And so those are usually blue or they can be green. But basically, if you look at a bin that's the color of the planet, it's probably a recycling bin. So what I would do is if you have any paper in your bag or just paper that you don't think you're going to use, you can try to find the recycling bin and put it in the bin. And then if you have any cans, definitely always recycle those. Those are good to make sure not to throw away. But if there's anything that you have that's soiled, so like a dirty pizza box or just anything that has grease or dirt on it, you definitely don't want to recycle that, because what can happen is you end up making it so that everything else in the bin can't be recycled either. So it's really important to just make sure anything that you recycle is very clean. But yeah, go ahead and try it. And at home, you should also have a green or blue recycling bin. So if you don't know where that is, definitely ask your parents. Okay. Erica says, this is awesome. Thank you, Erica. You're awesome. And then, okay, we have a link to National Grid. So I'm sure that's probably in answering Miss Phillips' question. George says, should we pick up trash on my street and how do I get rid of it? So that's a really, really good question. You can pick up trash on your street. I think that if it looks really dirty, I would say probably avoid it. Um, if you really want to pick it up, you can probably wear some of those rubber gloves just so that you're extra safe. Um, and one thing that you could do, George, is you could look into your community and see if they have any trash pickup groups, because I know that they definitely do, and that you could volunteer to do that on the weekends when you're not in school. So that would be a good way to help make the world a better place. Great. So SCSD teacher says, love this book. Loving the environment today and every day. That's such a good attitude to have. How do you minimize your waste personally? Reusable bottles, etc. Yeah, that's a great question. I think that is something that is really, really difficult because so many things come in packages. You know, especially if you are ordering food, for example. If you're getting something from a grocery store, usually it comes in some kind of container. It's really hard to do things without using waste. So personally, it is a little bit difficult, but I would definitely say that reusable bottles and reusable bags are a big one. A really small thing that I like to do at grocery stores is instead of putting fruit or vegetables in those little plastic bags, I just bring my own reusable bag and I put them inside of that. And so then when I'm checking out, it's actually easier to scan the barcode too if there's no wrapping around the fruit. And you know, some of those fruits and vegetables have their own natural coverings on them. So there's really no reason to have the plastic bag around it. So that's a small thing that I really like to do, but I definitely would say that I'm still working on that because I don't have a solid way of continuing to do that. I used to bring a reusable mug to Starbucks every day, but unfortunately, because of COVID, they don't allow for that anymore. So hopefully they lift that. That would be a great Earth Day gift for them to let people bring their own reusable mugs again. All right, thank you for that. And then Emily is asking, what project are you most proud of? So yeah, Emily, I think the project, so that's a really hard question. I guess this is just in my life, what the biggest project is that I'm proud of. Yeah, I mean, this book is definitely up there, but I think I don't have a specific project. I would just say that really focusing on committing to learning in school about sustainability. And if you don't know what sustainability is finding ways to be good to the environment, to be good to nature, and to continue allowing plants and animals to thrive around you. And so the book kind of talks about how to live sustainably. But I would say that I'm very proud of being able to focus on learning about the earth, learning about nature in school, and then continuing to work in those fields after school. So when I'm actually at work, I make sure that I'm doing something that will help the environment. And then that way I can go to sleep and I can feel good about what I did during the day. So I would say that that is my favorite project, if you can call it a project. Thanks, Emily. And Kenny is saying, can you explain how global warming isn't just about the world being too hot? Yeah, that's also a really, really good question. So global warming has to do with the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And so greenhouse gases impact the temperature because they impact how much heat stays in the earth from the sunlight. What it can also do is, so the most obvious parts of it are that it warms the earth up because it keeps that heat in. But what it also can do is it can change the seasonality. So it can change sort of when you get your typical hot seasons and when you get your colder seasons. So in that case, you might get the months that it is hot, maybe a little bit colder than normal. So it's not just about the earth being hot, it's about the changing of temperatures based on the seasonality. So changing of seasons. And so it can be a little bit confusing because I know that people do think about it just as the world getting hotter. So it's really just more temperature back and forth. So more fluctuations in temperature. All right, that was a really good question. And okay, Edward says, farmers markets, using everything until it's completely worn out or can't be repaired, sharing or donating instead of recycling or throwing away. Yeah, that's a really good point too. So that's definitely a way to minimize your waste personally. Make sure that you right, really use everything until it's worn out. That's something that I think I'm definitely doing because I have sneakers that I've probably worn out and definitely need to be replaced. And right, sharing or donating instead of recycling or throwing away. If you have clothes that you aren't using anymore, you could give it to someone else, give it to a friend or a family member who might use it. Or, you could donate it to Goodwill, put it somewhere else, but make sure that it doesn't just get thrown away. That's a great idea. Lori says, do processing foods contribute to global warming? Yeah, so that's a really hot topic, I think. I've seen a lot of this. I've heard a lot about this recently. So yeah, it does. I mean, anything that uses energy, depending on where you get your energy from, can contribute to climate change or global warming. But let's say that if you are getting your food from a factory that only purchases from clean sources like wind or hydroelectric or solar, then it's definitely a lot cleaner. And I would say it's not contributing to global warming because you're not putting carbon emissions in the atmosphere. So it really depends on how much processing is going on and where that plant is getting their electricity from. One thing too is that if you tend to lean more on the plant-based side, so having fruits and vegetables, grains, just things that don't require animals to produce the foods, that is much, much better for the environment because you're completely taking out a layer in you're completely taking out a section in the food chain that requires a lot of energy. And so if you are just eating plants directly instead of an animal eating plants and then you eating the animal, you're saving so much energy. So that can also be a really big way to minimize your carbon footprint. Love the talk. All right. Thanks so much, Edward. Then Carol says, I tried to garden and I have chickens too for eggs. Yeah, see, so that's really great. I think gardening is amazing. Just like we talked about the plants, eating more plants is a great, great way to minimize your carbon footprint. And I think having chickens for eggs is great, especially if you know that, the chickens are having a good life. They're enjoying it. I think that can be great. It can be enjoyable for you and it can be enjoyable for the chickens. All right. So Mo says, great questions, everyone. Happy Earth Day. Yes, happy Earth Day, everyone. And then Edward says, my son asked for chickens for years. Finally purchased 6 fuzzy balls the beginning of last March. Then we had so much time with them. Eggs started by July. Yeah, so that's really interesting. It does take a long time. And so, the natural process of getting food is takes a lot longer than people often think because we're so used to getting our food from supermarkets. We're so used to large factories making them for us. And so the fact that you can make some of that yourself by raising your own chickens shows you really how precious food really is. And then just as our solar panels expensive, I want to get them installed because I heard they lower electricity bills. Yeah, so that's a really, really good question, and we were just actually talking about that in my job. So yeah, it really depends on how you decide to go about purchasing solar panels. If you decide to get them from a third party, um, that and you can find those online, they can actually pay for it up front, but you might have a contract that sort of locks you in there for 25 years. So, if you feel like you're not going to move within the next 25 years, then maybe that's the route for you to go. If you decide to purchase them yourself, it can be around $15,000 to $25,000, depending on where you lived. I think those numbers are for Massachusetts, so I'm not quite sure about the Syracuse area, but you can definitely look at it online. And I believe National Grid has some numbers on their website as well about how much it costs. If you do decide to purchase your solar panels yourself, you do actually get to keep more of the savings. So that's definitely a benefit of doing that. All right, so I think we are done with the questions. And if anyone does have any other questions, feel free to reach out to the Most or National Grid. There's definitely ways to get in contact. So really appreciate everyone being here, especially taking this hour out of your day to be here on Earth Day. Take a breath and remember that the environment is important, nature is important, and take that time out of your day. So thank you so much. And then that's a really good ending comment. Don says, love National Grid. I use my solar panels and love them. That's wonderful. Thanks, Don. Really appreciate that. All right. Thank you. All right. Happy Earth Day. Bye, everyone.